I want it to be a fair fight, but of course there's always, like, I don't know what the word is, but it does get ugly, like you said.
I think we're taking a lot from the U.S. lately. In the last few elections that we've had, there's been more mudslinging than ever. So, even with the ads and stuff, you've seen more ads, and I don't like it, but it is what it is.
I definitely think I lose a little bit of respect for parties that get too aggressive. I mean, there's definitely a spectrum where I would say it still remains respectable, but parties do tend to get a little bit too aggressive, and I definitely lose respect for that.
While some Albertans may not know who they're voting for yet, those I spoke to know one thing. They expect some mudslinging. They may not like it, but they feel that it is par for the course these days. Political commentator Jana Brown joins us and to talk about this topic today because, mudslinging and dirty campaigns or ugly campaigns have pretty much become the norm, and we're starting to see it with this election, and it was only called today.
Well, it's becoming the norm, but actually Alberta was kind of late to the party on this. And that's because we had 44 years of rule from one dominant party in this province. And elections, they got combative, but, there was always a foregone conclusion who was going to win. And then we had this surprise upset 4 years ago. And now we've sort of moved into this new reality where we have two dominant political parties. And I think the stakes get a lot higher in a closer election. And I think we're starting to see here in Alberta the kind of dirty campaigns that maybe people in Ontario and British Columbia have been living with for longer than we have.
It's an interesting strategy, digging up dirt on the opponent. Who wins with that kind of a strategy?
Well, sadly, I think nobody wins. I really honestly don't think voters want the negativity. But the problem is, from a media point of view, the negativity is an easy story to cover. And from a news viewer's point of view, it's an easy story to absorb. So although we don't like it, we always sort of find ourselves falling into that trap of being, attracted to the negativity. But, it's up to the media and it's up to voters to kind of insist that, we focus on issues rather than personalities and rather than gossip.
You poll people for a living when it comes to these things. Do you ever ask them whether or not those kind of campaigns actually really do change their vote?
Well, we ask them that question, but sometimes the answers people give us don't actually align with the reality of the data. And what we know from a lot of the political science literature is that negative campaigning, it's very risky. It can backfire on you, but it can also be, when it's effective, it can be very effective. And so when races are close, when one party believes that they are behind and maybe they have less to lose, then the temptation of going negative is just too big, because despite what people say, negative campaigning can work.
And those little clips can really stick in someone's head, and they can really change what an election is being voted on.
Well, you think back to the last election, right? And what are the things we remember? We remember math is hard. We remember look in the mirror. Even if you go back to 2012, 7 years ago, we still use the phrase bozo eruption. We still talk about lake of fire, right? Those things have sort of come into the Alberta political lexicon, and they're here to stay. But it's those moments that they're like earworms, right? They just get into your head and you cannot forget them. And we're all waiting to see what the earworms of 2019 are going to be.
And we had it in this last story as well, talking about third parties that can also start slinging a lot of that mud without it necessarily coming back on parties. Is this a real problem in our election campaigns?
Right, and by third parties, it's in this election, it's not really the other political parties that are going to be the issue, because it really is a two-party race, and it's going to be hard for the political parties to break through. But the third parties that are going to matter are those sort of those actors who are maybe developing a website, who are developing a social media following, and they're outside of sort of the mainstream of media and the mainstream of politics, but they'll get a social media following, they'll be somewhat anonymous, and they'll maybe push some of these negative messages that the party leaders would rather stay away from.
Now, in the last couple of days, we've seen that some of the dirt digging has actually come in from within the UCP party, which is interesting enough. What say about that, where it's coming from within?
Well, it's funny because when I look back to sort of, a year and a half ago when the UCP first came together, I was one of those political analysts who sort of doubted that Jason Kenney would be able to put, this diverse group of traditional wild rosers and traditional progressive conservatives together, but he defied the critics and he put them together. So it's not surprising that there is some infighting and there is some splashback. I thought by this point in the election, Jason Kenney would be having a harder time keeping it together than he is. But his challenge going forward will be to, keep the clowns in the clown car, keep this diverse big tent party that he's put together, on the same track. And right now, the magnetic force that's holding the traditional Wild Rosers and the traditional Progressive Conservatives together is the desire to defeat the NDP. So as long as they can be united on that front, yes, there'll be these little distractions, but as long as they can be united on that front, Jason Kenney is entering this election in a pretty powerful position.
And what about the NDP? They are the government right now. Does throwing out dirt, or maybe their website, The Truth About Jason Kenney, does that work for them?
Well, they are the government and they are the incumbent, but they're well behind in the polls. And even though the UCP has suffered some damage in the last few days, I don't think they're in jeopardy of losing this election quite yet. So the NDP has entered this race behind, and when you're behind, the natural tendency is to get a little more scrappy and a little more aggressive.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for your time tonight and all your insight.
Thanks for having me.
It's going to be an interesting 28 days.
Thank you.
Well, advance polls run Tuesday, April 9th, 2019 to Saturday, April 13th. In case you want to get to an advance polls, they run from 9 a.m. until 8 p.m. If you want to find out where one is, head to elections.ab.ca for more information on polling stations and, of course, voter registration. And for everything you need to know about campaigns, party promises, and all the issues throughout the election, we have a special election page dedicated to it. Head to 660citynews.com.